Hello, and welcome to today's Design News webinar, Pushing the Limits of Motion Control, sponsored by Encoder Products Company, Harmonic Drive LLC, Maxon, and Performance Motion Devices, and broadcast by Informa. I'm Daphne Allen, editor of Design News, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. Our webinar today is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout our event. Toward the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Now, on to our panel discussion, Pushing the Limits of Motion Control. I'm really pleased to welcome our panelists today. We have Sarah Walter, Technical Applications Manager at Encoder Products Company, Brian Coyne, Vice President of Engineering at Harmonic Drive, Biren Patel, Business Development Manager at Maxon Mobility Solutions, and Gowrisankaran, Vice President of Engineering and Strategy at Performance Motion Devices. To learn about our speakers, please visit the bios widget. I have some questions for our panel today, and later on we'll be inviting you to submit your own. But before we get started, I'd like to ask each speaker to explain a little bit about the motion control solutions they offer and the markets they serve. Brian, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you, Daphne. My name is Brian Coyne, VP of Engineering, as you said, from Harmonic Drive. So Harmonic Drive is a global company. You can see the first logo on the left is located in Beverly, Massachusetts, where I am located. We also have HDSE, which is in Germany, and HDSI, which is in Japan. And we offer 3 different types of products for the most part, including component sets, which consists of a circular spline, a flex line, and a wave generator with a match set. We also have unit type gears, which also includes a cross roller bearing and housing the component set, as well as actuators. So not just the gear, but also includes a motor and an encoder and even other devices. And I expect much of our conversation today may be referring to integrated actuators, which is a relatively new product for us. You can see in this slide that it ranges from size 5 all the way up to size 32. So it not only includes the gear, the motor, but also has dual encoders. So one encoder on the motor side, one encoder on the output side, as well as an integrated servo drive, all within the same housing. And with that, I expect to discuss this in more detail, but I'll hand it over to Sarah from Encoder Products Company to explain her company.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, I'm Sarah Walter with Encoder Products. I'm the Technical Applications Manager here at EPC. Our headquarters here in Sagal, Idaho has been around for a little over 50 years. We do have a global presence with other manufacturing and business sites in the UK, China, and India. Here at our headquarters, we're actually vertically integrated. We have a machine shop on site with CNC and milling capabilities, a full engineering team that works on design and product support, as well as customer service, and quite a large production team that does all the assembly and build of our encoder products. Encoders are used in a wide variety of industry and applications, anything from food and beverage, printing and labeling, to agriculture equipment, just about anything that moves and you need to keep track of speed or position, you're likely going to find some kind of sensor feedback device, and our encoders are part of that solution. So we actually offer somewhere around 40 different products, and those products have many different options electronically and mechanically that allows you to come up with probably millions of configurations. But we can tailor those selections down for each customer depending on whatever application they're working on specific to their industry. So as far as the innovations that we see, we have actually added to our product lineup over the years depending on where we saw the need. So a lot of times that could be expanded temperature ranges, higher speeds that our bearings can handle, longer operation, just keeping up with what we see the marketplace needs. As far as new product development, we're always interested in developing with customers specific for their needs, but then also offering that more broadly after we've developed it further. Safety is a factor for a lot of the new automated equipment that you see. So redundant feedback, so that there's possibly two different types of technology that are providing the sensor feedback. So if there is a failure, it's not the same failure mode that can be repeated with each sensing device. I would say another area that we see some innovation is the different communication protocols that some of these devices use. You may have heard the terminology of Industry 4.0 and devices being able to report real-time data back to a user that's looking at an overview of the entire factory floor. So communication, between devices is also significant, and we have to make sure that our devices can provide the feedback that customers use to support their entire equipment. Just from a motor all the way to some more complicated machine. And I'm sure there'll be some questions about that later, but for now, I'll pass it over to Biren at Maxon and let him take it from here.
Thank you, Sarah. So same as we've heard here, Maxon is also a global company. We have a footprint that spreads for manufacturing across 9 different countries. We also have 30 sales offices around the globe to help support the requirements and needs for motion control. We provide brushed and brushless DC motors, gear heads, and drive electronics. We cover aerospace, medical technology, mobility solutions, and industrial automation. And so we typically offer solutions in 3 categories. One would be our component products, where we have individual products that can be connected together, from motor, gear, encoder, and drive electronics, to modified catalog products, as well as then special products where we built them to customer specifications. About 80% of our business would fall into the second and third category, and then about 20% is catalog products that are not modified. And as the motion control industry requires more and more compact solutions, we've developed integrated drive solutions such as our IDX, which I've shown an exploded view here in the top left. You can select on our configured order platform the motor, the encoder, gearbox, whether you want to brake or not, and electronics or not within the package. The reason to do that is to simplify cabling, and we can talk a little bit more to that later. Then I've shown a full, an explosion of a joint actuator as well, which we've built around our dynamic torque motors, which is a frameless motor. We also have an off-center encoder for that, which I've showed here on the top right. And then we offer a variety of drive electronics, from simple speed controllers, torque amplifiers, to full position controllers that can be decentralized. And then we also offer centralized solutions with master controllers, where you can control anywhere from 3 axes all the way up to 32 axes and have inverse kinematics and things like that. We can get into different questions as we proceed here. I'll go ahead and pass it along to Prab with performance motion devices.
Thanks, Biren. We're similar to, obviously, we are all in the same market space. Obviously, that's why we are on the panel together. So Performance Motion Devices is a Boston-based company. Obviously, we have sales partners and distributors all over the world. We sell through Mouser and a bunch of other online distributors too. So we existed since 1992. One difference between the companies that you saw here, we start off as a chip manufacturer, so we do ICs for motion control. So when the volumes go really high, above 1,000, then they tend to try to migrate to ICs and do their own designs. Obviously, we are 9001 and 13485 certified. We do a ton in lab automation, healthcare, medical side of things. As you see, there's our offices there in the Boston area. So just a quick highlight in terms of the products, obviously similar to the rest of them. We don't do motors and gears and drive. We mainly focus on motion control, just on the drive side, on the control side. So we provide cards to full-blown digital drives that is a 3-card stack that has the drive, the motion controller, and the amplifier built in. And we have cable-connected drive solutions down to chips. So typically a customer would start off, obviously, when they're evaluating with a card or a drive, and when the volumes are lower, they would stay with it for their final commercialized solution. But a lot of them start doing their own board designs and then switch over to our chips. So all of them use the same C-Motion API. So you can actually start developing on our card or drive and then move on to the ICs. So typically, that's the progression we've seen in this market. So with that, I'll give it back to Daphne.
Thank you, Prab, Brian, Biren, and Sarah. I'm really happy to have you all with us today, and a big welcome to our audience. So I wanted to start our panel discussion just talking a little bit about, where things are today in motion control. Each of you have talked a little bit about some of the market requirements. So I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about, automation, because it sounds like industrial logistics, even healthcare environments are automated like never before. Can you share, any new challenges this automated world presents and some motion control solutions?
Sure, I can start and maybe pass it on to maybe go in the reverse direction. Yeah, so we see a big trend towards miniaturization, right? Like Maxon showed, the tiny motors. There's a lot that goes on, like especially in the healthcare space, surgical robotics. There's a lot they want to make it smaller and smaller. And even lab automation, we've seen customers put our chips at pipettes at the end of the pipettes for control. So they become really small. It's the size of your finger. So the one trend is miniaturization. And the other part of it is, like Sarah talked about, there's a lot of new encoder formats that are coming out. So the push for all these controllers to support absolute encoder, sine, cosine, bis, lots of different formats. So there's a trend to using newer interfaces to get more sensor data for safety. Also IoT, Industry 4.0 kind of stuff, where they want more data because we are right next to a motor. We're able to collect a lot of information, so they can do predictive maintenance. So it's getting more sophisticated. Before, the crux was, can you move it fast and quiet with less power? But now there's more layers of sophistication being added.
Biren,
So yeah, with Prab mentioning miniaturization, that's definitely something we're seeing more and more from medical to lab. So lab automation in medical, as well as robotics, mobile platforms. The lighter they are, the less torque is required to move them, so less friction on the ground. So we're seeing more and more requirements for more torque density, which obviously leads into power density. So we're definitely seeing that. We're also seeing, ease of replacement on certain axes with lifetimes and product use increasing. So with ease of replacement, it's easier to replace items when you have less cables. So that's where we've designed kind of the compact drive with having just the need for power and communication and not having that pull back motor wires, encoder wires, and things like that all the way back. So I'd say more and more decentralized axes is something that's trending.
Brian or Sarah, I know each of you mentioned a little bit about some trends, but is there anything that you'd respond to, anything that Prab or Biren has noted, particularly when it comes to either miniaturization or the expanded need to communicate with more encoders or other devices in the environments?
Yeah, actually, on both of the comments, as far as the compactness, we're actually in the process of product development. The plan is for this calendar year, exploring a new technology that allows us to, reduce the overall height of our product. And again, that's in order to fit into tighter design spaces that customers have approached us about over the years. And then again, that communication, the protocols that are most common in the industry, BIS, or even the Ethernet type capabilities like EtherCAT or Profinet, Ethernet IP, and obviously making sure that, those solutions are obviously more complicated. So you have to, come up with a solution that obviously meets the needs of those compact spaces, but has the capabilities, for the technologies that our customers are developing, and being able to provide a solution that fits in with their design.
Yeah, I would agree with all the panelists, actually. Miniaturization and torque density especially is certainly a trend. And in the integrated actuators that we developed that I showed on one of the introductory slides, that was our main goal, to maximize our torque density, or the torque to size or torque to weight ratio. And miniaturization, for instance, our RSF5 is only 22 millimeters square. So it's extremely small. And our incremental version is of 48 millimeters, and we've only added 0.4 millimeters to add a servo drive within that. So it was our main goal for our integrated actuators to make them as short as possible with the same cross-section. And because of our customers that require, aesthetically pleasing robot designs, especially for different types of, purposes, and fitting not just extremely small actuators within their designs, but also to be able to run the cables easily through those designs. And that's another reason why we pursued product development within integrated actuators, to only require one cable, as compared to two cables per actuator, one for the motor, one for the encoder. Integrated actuators allows for just a single cable. And with CAN Open, it's only 4 conductors within that cable. So an example that I presented in the past with 6-axis robot, you might have a bundle of cables that's over 31 millimeters in diameter, whereas if you daisy chain one to the next, you only have a single cable that could be 7 millimeters in diameter. So just sort of as an example of the space savings that you're allowed and that our customers require.
You mentioned, simplifying wiring or cable management. Let's talk about that a little bit. What's driving that? Is that just simply miniaturization? Is it new applications? And, what else can be done to simplify these systems?
Yeah, I think that the trends in robotics is very thin designs, whether it's just an arm, or even examples of like a humanoid type robot, or other small examples of robots, not necessarily industrial, where space isn't so much of a concern. It requires extremely small actuator designs, but also simple cabling, and not just for the space, but also for longevity of the cable, or even special environments might require special raw cable types in order to avoid damage, which could occur from bending or torsion or even abrasion, which we find to be probably the most common problem that a system may encounter, and that's the mating cables failing, and not necessarily the actuator or components within the actuator.
Interesting. Biren, I see you nodding. Is there anything you'd like to add to that about, simplifying or, kind of meeting these application needs?
No, I mean, I agree with Brian. It's depending on the environment you're in. If it's a harsh condition, you're spending more money on special coated cables. And then the other part of it is a lot of times you forget about the flexing the cables go through. So with AGV arms or humanoid arms, the flexing you have on the cabling, that will typically fail before you have any kind of bearing failure or other failures in the actuator. So just to get better life, I think having less cables is a benefit. And then the cable runs themselves, trying to pass them through moving axes, like rotary axes, and then trying to have cables that don't spin with that. That's another issue as well. So having less cables, there's less of that complexity.
And I think one thing I would add is actually we did a white paper on the weight. We were saying, why is it getting miniaturized? It's very interesting. Actually, cable is like 30-40% of the weight of a robot design, because they have, like Brian and Biren were mentioning, the thick cables. So if you have a distributed architecture like Biren was talking about, where all the cables are localized, then it's actually the weight too. And then you need custom flex cables that it's mainly the failures we see are typically cables or connectors. The electronics are not the ones that fail. So it's usually the mechanical wear or how they're constructed is a problem. And in mobile robotics, what we've seen is they want to make the weight of the actual moving object lighter so they can increase the payload that they can carry, because it's an overall weight physics problem. So the cables again come into play. So if you can have distributed architectures where everything is more tightly coupled without as much cable going around. So if it's just power and your communications, then it's a lot fewer cables that are running from node to node.
Yeah,
I would just brief. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off there, Brian.
No, go ahead, Sarah. No, go ahead.
Just a brief add. I mean, obviously, the other factor that we hear about too is just troubleshooting in general, eliminating more variables that customers, after something's been in the field long enough, to keep the maintenance time goes down. If you're able to design it more simply, so the fewer connections for someone to go through and eliminate where a failure could be occurring, that's a time saver for people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the example that I've presented in the past with 6 axis robot arm with 6 actuators, it could be up to 108 connections, including if it's an incremental encoder with 14 potentially. Not everyone uses 14, but it's a lot of connections and it's a lot of time. So there's cost savings not just in the hardware but also in the labor to install a typical conventional servo system, as compared to integrated, where it's just 4 conductors and a single cable. Yeah, and also I think it was Prabhakar that touched on AGVs, and it may not be obvious, but if you have an external servo drive, that's weight as well. So the total system weight should be considered, and especially for AGV that's concerned about battery life of their vehicle, it's critical to decrease the total system weight, not just the actuator weight. So it's not just the cable, it's also a control box to house a typical servo drive that some may consider to use. So again, integrated actuators could be a solution for that industry as well.
Okay, excellent. Sarah, you mentioned troubleshooting. How does that exactly work? Is that where it's a collaborative effort, working side by side with your customers, or is that something that you try to anticipate ahead of time and create stock products that are kind of already solved.
Sure. I mean, in a perfect world, everything works perfectly from the minute you install it. But as we all know, once something goes into a larger system, the number of variables that you need to account for goes up. And sometimes it can be, based on the site location, or the time of day because of temperature. So it really is a collaborative effort, and we try to look at it from a system perspective, obviously focusing on our product specifically and how it performs in different environments. But, as far as the new technology, we're always trying to make sure that we take into consideration all of that. And, those designs, something that is robust. So even when it is seeing these harsh environments, I think someone mentioned maybe, ease of replacement of certain things or maintenance is certainly a factor. But like I said, it is very collaborative as well, trying to make sure that we understand the customer's needs, where this is, where the encoder product is going in and what type of system.
Yeah, I think one thing we do obviously the motion controller is the electronics that's controlling the motor and taking encoder readings. So we add capability for development, right? And there's a trace and other capabilities where just like you can look at different variables, current, phase currents, all sort of stuff. You can collect data over time. So you can use it for predictive maintenance, but people also use it for diagnostics. So a lot of our machine design end customers add the hooks in, so they could debug it remotely. So for maintenance, one is trying to troubleshoot where the problem is. They're able to narrow it down pretty quickly once they collect a set of data. So we, in our controllers, I'm sure others do too, provide capability for tracing and actually capturing information. So every cycle, it would collect phase currents or lots of different details. And they could tell, is it the motor failing? Is it something else? They would know where in the system the failure has happened. And then they can have a more intelligent troubleshooting exercise. So typically we work with our customers to kind of provide that for development, but then they add it to their machine design as diagnostic tools. So for their tech support person to debug it, it's much quicker.
Okay, excellent. I heard earlier the mention of increased power density as a need. Can we explain that a little bit more about, what that involves and what the solutions are? Is that because you're trying to get more power in a smaller footprint, or is it that there's more robust applications today that require more power?
Yeah, I can help with that. Torque density. It's typically the torque output of the actuator as compared to the size or the weight. So yes, customers typically want as much torque as possible in the smallest size possible for many of the applications that I've worked with, whether it's using our standard actuators or designing a fully custom actuator in order to meet the requirements of the customer's application. But I think for most, if not all, torque density is extremely important, as small as possible with the highest torque possible.
And it also comes down to their machine design, like the type of motor they pick. So you have like 3 vectors, right? You have torque, you have accuracy, you have weight. So they have to kind of balance in their design which ones are the primary. In some applications, torque is key, like this textile winding. There's certain applications where they go super fast and then they have to shuttle and go back. And in some, like mobile robotics, again, torque is important. Some applications, it's like a microscope stage. More than torque, it's the precision. So they tend to pick the components, the type of motor, brushless, stepper, and the accuracy they need, and the torque density. So they all come into the equation when they actually design, and they're picking components to make it work.
Yeah, for me, I think, so with torque density, I think it comes more in play specifically for mobile robotics or applications where everything, it's battery driven. So anytime you have battery-powered vehicles or a humanoid robot or whatever, I guess you're really wanting to conserve on current, and that's where torque density or weight will come into play. The more weight you have, the more mass you need to move, the more torque you're going to require, or larger components, and then trying to minimize the weight of the motor and get the most torque out of it will help other axes down the line as well. So I think with battery-driven applications typically is where we see more requirements for having a more torque-dense product rather than if something's powered by the wall.
Excellent, thank you. I'd like to ask about if there's an increased need for intelligence on motion control devices today. And is that something that's evolving or changing?
I just a real quick, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Prab.
No, go ahead.
It actually is probably maybe related to some of the maintenance part as well. You know, there are instances where just environmental information is something of interest, or you know, for encoders, they've been fairly passive devices, you know, just providing a signal back that a controller reads. But if there's more data to be collected or shared or used, I think that's definitely something that we're seeing a trend of as well.
Yeah, I think there's always more intelligence being added with more sensors, especially if you're talking about mobile robotics. There's vision, there's mapping, there's all sorts of sensing that's happening. And then there's more intelligence being added in terms of the algorithms that we do. So if you look at a mechanical system, they're not linear. So you're trying to get rid of linearity problems and with algorithms in your motion controller. So we tend to add a lot of custom algorithms to try and compensate for. It's very hard to design a mechanical system. So you're trying to compensate for those problems in your controller, and you want to be able to sense. And we had one application where they didn't have enough space to have an encoder at the motor. It was at the far end. So you're trying to translate that, the feedback that you're getting from the encoder that's not at the spot you want to be, using feed forward and other techniques and algorithms to kind of get to very precise location. So it's a design by design issue, but there's always more data to kind of being able to sense and provide the right precise motion is key.
Excellent. And
I can also add to that that you know, our integrated actuators also do have I/O on board. So we have 4 I/O, 2 dedicated inputs and 2 programmable inputs, which could be digital or analog, and also outputs. So the intention was to be able to connect external devices to our actuators in order to collect data on top of the data, of course, that we have on board with, you know, current data and temperature, in order to you know, monitor conditions, not just of the actuator, but also the environment that it's mounted in. So yeah, I know some customers are taking advantage of the I/O, and maybe not necessarily to monitor the actuator, but also to use as sort of a remote I/O device. So you can connect it, you know, for a different purpose, but the main purpose would be to connect it to the CAN bus using our actuator, and then have the same, on the CAN bus, the same single cable running back to your master controller. So that's the purpose of offering I/O on actuators as well.
And is the increasing prevalence of IoT devices, you know, driving some of this, or causing new challenges, or driving new applications?
That was our expectation for IIoT or Industry 4.0 purposes and condition monitoring of the, not just the actuator, but of the system. So yeah, that was certainly the one intention of adding the I/O capability.
And Prab, I heard you mention, you know, the use of algorithms. Does that mean that, you know, one day AI could play a role in motion control? And is that anything that people should be preparing for?
It's possible. I guess everyone's writing code through ChatGPT. So I'm sure there's a set of algorithms, right? There's FOC, current control, PID, Park-Clark transforms and stuff. Inverse kinematics, I think Biren and Brian mentioned about. I think they'll be used as tools for development. I'm not sure. There's still, you need that person who can hear the noise and tell you what the problem is with the machine. AI cannot solve that. So you need experts that are used to building these machines. And some of them, they have to take it through FDA. And so in those kind of cases where you need an expert hands-on, and just architecting a machine, it's hard for me to see AI doing it. It's more, I think, these algorithms we work on are more, you work with the customer and they have a specific problem that they're trying to solve. There was one case where they just mounted the linear stage at the wrong spot in the machine, and the vibration was affecting the accuracy. They could solve it by redesigning the machine, but they don't want to spend another year. So there, we added an algorithm to just compensate for what was not an ideal design. So sometimes algorithms are used as band-aids to patch a bad design, like in machine design, but sometimes it helps in creating new ways of controlling. Like there's a lot of sensorless stuff. There's a lot of new algorithms that are coming out for better controls with less sensors and stuff. So I think there's a broad range of algorithms that are used, especially like mobile robotics that you do regen. There's a lot of things they do. They do e-stop and safety stuff, collision detection algorithms. So they detect based on phase current, do feed forward, and do a bunch of calculations to figure out, okay, where is the problem? What should I do next? So there's a lot of new algorithms. I think AI may help us have a library of these new algorithms, probably.
Okay, excellent. Anybody have anything to add to that about the impact of AI? Or earlier, since we are talking about humans and machines, kind of cohabitating as we move forward, there was a discussion about safety. So I was going to step back and talk a little bit about, as humans and machines are working together more closely these days, what are some new safety features that enable such close collaboration, and how does motion control advances play a role in that?
I guess I can speak to some projects that I've worked on. Obviously there are many different sensors that are often used in those automated devices because, if you have a machine, especially one that's large enough that could cause injury, you want to make sure that if it's interacting with humans, and there's obviously, I'm sure our panel can speak to the many varieties there are, there needs to be backup in case of any type of failure of one of those sensing devices. I know in one project that we were involved in, obviously there is a photo eye that is perhaps looking at markings on a floor as an AGV navigates a warehouse floor, and our encoders are placed on, say, the steering drive, but then also the motor that's controlling the speed. And so, there's a combination of sensors that are helping, this AGV make its way. And any failure on one of those sensing devices usually triggers a, kind of a shutdown mode or stasis, so that there are no collisions between either people or other machines. So that's just kind of an example of, where those different types of sensing devices, are placed, so that in case of one failure, there is something that triggers something to stop the machine altogether.
Okay, excellent. Anybody have anything to add about any other safety features or redundancy that can be built into motion control?
Sure, for redundancy.
Like the force control, we have the torque sensors, right, for sensing torque, strain gauges and stuff. There's also algorithms to kind of detect when there's a collision. So you have a lot of touch applications. So we have one application where there's a robot that's testing a touchscreen with a tip. It's a scare arm, and they did it all with algorithms, without sensors. And you're able to detect just an increase in current and control the loops and stop the positioning, stop the motion. So it depends on the application, but there's a lot of cases where collaborative robots, you have to be able to detect a touch. And you have some cases they use torque sensors, some cases it's algorithm based on current feedback stuff. So it all depends on the size of the machine. Like what Sarah was mentioning, if it's a bigger system, they can add extra sensors for some of this. But in other cases, they add sophistication to the motion controller.
Okay, excellent. Well, I see we are already getting some great questions in from our audience. So I thought I might turn to some of those questions just to address some of those. And hopefully we can get to as many as possible today. Before I start, though, I do want to remind our audience about our webinar survey, which is available on the right of our presentation window. If you did close the survey, you can reopen the widget by clicking the icon along the bottom of your screen. And we thank you very much in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation in that survey will allow us to serve you better. And so on to some of our audience questions. And as a reminder, our audience can type a question into the text box located at the right of the presentation window, or just click on the Q&A icon. And like I said, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can today. If we don't answer your question, we'll be sharing all these questions with our speakers who could reply offline after our event. So looking here at some of the questions we have, let's see. Is increasing torque density and making components smaller impacting the longevity of a component? And part two to this question is, does that impact whether the industry is moving toward disposable components versus repairable components as features and functions are integrated? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I can speak to it on our side, I guess, a little bit in terms of longevity of components. So for Maxon, when we look at a design for a product, we typically design around life. So we don't sacrifice on life to make things necessarily smaller. So our targets typically for brushless motors or brush motors is going to be in the thousands of hours. On the brushless side, it's typically the bearings that limit life, and then if you're adding a gearbox, the wear component there. But we strive to design gearboxes on continuous lives of over thousands of, like 1,000 hours or more. So even when we look at a torque dense product, it's with life in mind. So we're not trying to break physics or anything like that. We stay within the laws and kind of develop around that. So I think it's cost and torque density are the two, I guess, overlying factors when designing. So as far as longevity goes, I don't think that's affected with the products that we're designing and building that are more torque dense.
Yeah, adding on to what Biren said, on the electronic side, right, we're seeing obviously Moore's law, you're getting more to do with the same footprint. So if you look at our drive from 10 years back, we did 500 watts and it's only at 25% of the size, but we're able to do 1 kilowatt. It's just the evolution of the chips and the mechanics and the controls around it. It has evolved, and we're able to leverage advances in smartphones and also all the controllers, your processors, DSPs, all those are shrinking and are able to do more than what they were able to do. So I think it's just evolution that it's increasing. I don't think the life cycle, actually, it's surprisingly, it's actually gotten better, right? As the microprocessor families go down, you're getting more longevity, and they have more redundancy and other features built into them.
Right. I think even with the microprocessors, I think controllers are getting better, so you're able to better control currents going to the motor, so you're not overheating motors as in the past and things like that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Someone from our audience asks or says that keeping an automation team trained in current is challenging. So if each of you could choose just one protocol for an automation engineering to be proficient in, what would you choose?
I'm biased towards CAN-open at the moment. Is that, you're speaking of a communication protocol, I would assume?
Yeah.
So yeah, certainly we offer CAN-open for all of our integrated actuators. But that said, we are offering EtherCAT very soon. So that's coming soon. It's being developed, starting with our largest and working our way to our smallest. But at the moment, CAN-open would be my biased opinion.
I would probably second CAN-open as well. I mean, we see a lot of, obviously that's a standard of the automotive industry. So a lot of the larger equipment, that's kind of a standard that a lot of those manufacturers are already familiar with. So I think that's led to obviously using that as a platform for feedback. In general, I think a good understanding of programming language is good, just so that you have it's almost like speaking a different language. You know, once you know one or two, you're able to adapt that knowledge for others.
Yeah, on our side, I would say the same. CAN-open, EtherCAT would be the protocol. Once you know CAN-open, I mean, taking that to EtherCAT is fairly straightforward. It's CAN-open over EtherCAT rather than over the two-wire CAN line. So.
Yeah, and I would add to Sarah, it's like knowing C. If you know C, you can program in lots of different languages. You can migrate to Python and trying to get newer, fresh out of school grads to adopt your products and work in motion control. Obviously, you need the controls background, but you also need the programming background. And obviously, standards like EtherCAT, Ethernet, CAN-open help. Once they do one, they can easily implement other variants of it. The key would be, I would say, in my team, if you actually buy just DKs or eval kits from customers, like take a motor, take a controller, hook them up together, that puts a great learning experience, right? They're actually making something move based on kits that they buy and put it together. One part is just the knowledge of EtherCAT and CAN-open and C and stuff, but actually making something work is key. So if they were trying to train people, I would say get them, build up an example exercise that they would try to spin a motor and see if their engineers can do that. And that's a great learning. They would have to pick an encoder, pick a motor, controller, learn all the pieces in a machine.
Excellent. When in the design process do you recommend making the build versus buy decision?
Typically early on, in our case, what we've seen is they would buy either an integrated drive or a card, or when the volumes are lower and they're prototyping, like a lot of startups that are doing new machine designs, they want to get to market fast. So they would buy up to a point. So depending on volume, if it's more than 1,000, then they would start working on a build in parallel. But in a lot of machine design cases, let's say DNA sequencing or lab automation, they're not doing thousands of machines. They're doing 500 a year, let's say. So it comes to an intersection of cost versus time. How much engineering resource do you have? And if they're able to do it with our pre-built drives or cards and the integrated actuators or motors, they get to market faster, and there's a little bit of increased cost, but they're able to just buy that component as a whole. If the volumes are really, really high, obviously you want to start your build in parallel. So typically that's what we see. Most customers start with the buy, and then when the volumes cross maybe 500 to 1,000, then they would start working on a build project.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Anybody have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would agree with that as well. But especially integrated actuators, it's plug and play, so the customer can focus more on the application, especially software. I understand, many robot designs, maybe even 50-50, hardware versus software, so they can focus on software and use a sort of plug and play solution for the hardware, such as an integrated actuator.
Okay, excellent. I have a question here. Stepper or brushless DC servo motor, what is the best choice for an industrial robot arm designs?
We've actually interestingly seen both. We have a hybrid now with this closed loop stepper, right? They're taking the lower cost of a stepper motor, but adding encoder and sensor feedback and getting the performance. You get higher torque with a stepper motor. Obviously, the brushless is more expensive. So depending on, again, where we talked about torque density, cost, and precision, we want super high precision in a brushless. But if there's a lot of newer systems, like we see mobile robots that are using closed loop stepper kind of solutions. They get a high torque, they're cheaper, and they're able to do very precise positioning with a closed loop stepper kind of application. So it kind of depends on the form factor of the motor. In a lot of our use cases, what we see is they pick the motor based on the mechanical design, not from an actual performance point of view, and then they try to fit the system around it. So we see both. Obviously, brushless has ruled the world for a while in terms of precision, but we see a lot of steppers coming in with closed loop options that are catching up because they're a little bit cheaper.
Excellent, thank you. What encoder technologies are most common in robotic joints or inductive or optical applications?
I can take that. I can help with that. Yeah, I mean, our actuators for the most part are using magnetic, but we also use optical solutions, as well as, lesser case inductive and even capacitive. But magnetic offers sort of a robust. You don't have to worry about dust and debris getting on the optical glass for an optical encoder. So typically, a magnetic solution would offer a more robust solution, but optical may offer a higher resolution solution. So we use both depending on the application, as well as, like I said, inductive and capacitive.
And sorry, I was actually trying to unmute my mic there for a moment. I would actually agree with what Brian said. Honestly, a lot of times it comes down to the mechanical package more so than the technology. And it just depends on what's offered, that fits best, depending on what, where the customer is needing to place that feedback. But obviously with environmental factors, if there's like heavy vibration or something, depending on the optical technology, the magnetic might be a better option.
Thank you. Are outrunner frameless motors becoming more common for increased torque?
So I'll start with that one. On our side, it's not necessarily true that the outrunner is going to have more torque. One of the motors that I highlighted was our dynamic torque motors. That's actually a inner runner slotted frameless motor where that motor produces almost twice the torque in a smaller form factor than our largest outrunner frameless motor does. Part of that is the magnetics that are used, the amount of copper we can push in on the windings, and then the heat dissipation we can get with the stator being on the outside versus on the inside. So it's not necessary that it needs to be an outrunner for more torque. Inner runners can definitely get that as well. And we've seen that with more of our with the slotted windings.
Okay, excellent. I think we're probably running a little bit close to the end of our hour. So to our audience members who have submitted questions that we haven't gotten to, we'll be following up after our event. So please stay tuned. I wanted to just take a moment just to have each of you to wrap up, to just maybe explain, what you think the future holds a little bit when it comes to motion control, and what advances do you anticipate seeing in the next few years?
I'll go first just briefly. I think it's kind of the thing the advancements of the connectivity between devices and that real-time data, and then the addition of more information that is, say, provided, say even in our product package, like the environmental information as far as temperature. I mean, as the technologies that we use on board our devices improve and even get smaller, that allows us to innovate what we're able to add to, the encoders that we manufacture. So I would say that we're going to see that continue.
Yeah, I would go next. I think that motion control is a fun space to be in, because there's so many, if you look at it, there's so many and really cool end applications. Like in this panel, we've already talked about mobile robotics, healthcare, lab automation, lots of areas, right? So it's applied all over the place. So you don't realize it till you start working in it, that everything that's made requires motion. So there's a lot of technological advances that are going on, and we'll keep improving our products to kind of keep pace with what is required by the customers.
Yeah, and we continue to see, we started the conversation with torque density and miniaturization. So we continue to see customers that require even smaller designs. So I expect moving forward, even smaller design requests will continue.
Yeah, for my side, I think there's, oh, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
No, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think one of the other advancements I see is ways to communicate to controllers wirelessly. So one of the things we've started with our motion controller platform is having Bluetooth on board, so that if somebody is walking down the floor, shop floor or warehouse, you can quickly connect with your cell phone and just get quick statuses on what's happening. If there is something in terms of preventive maintenance, then that information can be gathered wirelessly as well, rather than having the need to have a computer connecting to it, whether it be USB, CAN, Profinet, whatever. You can quickly gather that information as you walk past a device.
Okay, excellent. Well, the future definitely seems bright. Thank you all very, very much for sharing your expertise today, answering my questions, as well as our audience questions. Thank you very much. Definitely want to thank our sponsors today: Encoder Products Company, Harmonic Drive LLC, Maxon, and Performance Motion Devices. We sincerely appreciate your support. And to our audience, thank you very, very much for joining us. Within the next 24 hours, you'll be receiving a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to watch today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been available today to listen live. Our webinar is copyright 2023 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned and copyrighted by Informa Markets. Our individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of our speakers, Sarah, Brian, Biren, and Prab, I'm Daphne Allen. Thank you very much for your time and sharing your expertise. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.